Muy buenas tardes a todos. Bienvenidos a la presentación del doctor Neil Stuart. Él nos visita de la Universidad de Edimburgo. Él trabaja en el Instituto de Geografía de la Universidad de Edimburgo, es catedrático e investigador. Tiene diversos artículos de suma importancia, todos indexados. Es un viejo conocido ya del Instituto de Geografía y de la UNAM. Desde hace muchos años viene pues, cada año, solamente la pandemia interrumpió sus visitas. Afortunadamente hace poco se reiniciaron los vuelos de Reino Unido hacia México, así que pues bueno, ya tuvo la oportunidad de venir con nosotros. Ha dado cursos dentro del Instituto de Geografía y a la comunidad en general geográfica, entonces pues ya no es un desconocido. Afortunadamente, para mi sorpresa, cada año va mejorando su español. Cuando yo lo conocí no hablaba más que hola, ¿qué tal? Gracias. Pero cada año que nos visita ya va mejorando su español, así es de que pues no hay ningún problema. De todos modos, al final si tienen preguntas, las pueden expresar en inglés o en español y aquí yo estoy para apoyarlo. En la comunidad que nos está viendo en línea, igual pueden ahí ingresar sus comentarios y con todo gusto el doctor les va a responder. Créanme que siempre que nos visita es un gusto recibirlo, ya que es una persona muy, muy cálida, es muy amable. Desde que lo conozco es una persona muy abierta, que pues lo que él más quería era cooperar con nosotros, con la universidad. Nos conocimos en un curso de bases de datos espaciales, que es precisamente una materia que por ahí les imparto, no solamente en la licenciatura, sino en la maestría. Él también daba esas clases en conjunto con otro profesor que también nos conocimos en Santiago de Chile, hace muchos años. Por aquí también ya tiene amigos, investigadoras que estudiaron por allá. Entonces, pues ya es un viejo conocido de la casa, ¿no? Y él viene cada año siempre a compartirnos sus experiencias o a platicarnos sobre cómo se desarrolla la geografía en Reino Unido, en Edimburgo, que de hecho, pues bueno, él es escocés, es de la parte norte del Reino Unido, y yo creo que eso es lo que hace que pues, sea un poquito más amigable, más abierto, así es de que tengan toda la confianza de expresarle sus dudas. Vale mucho la pena la presentación y espero que la disfruten. ¿Okay? Entonces, sin más, le dejo la palabra al doctor Neil Stuart. Gracias.
Hola a todos. Gracias por venir aquí en el instituto. Es muy bien por estar aquí de nuevo. Primeramente, gracias a Marco por preparar eso y gracias al Instituto de Geografía, especialmente sus colegas aquí, y doctora Tere y doctora Ana, por organizar este taller. Si tú puedes escuchar, mi español no es muy bien, por esta razón va a hablar en inglés. Creo que está bien. But I can talk quite slow, so I hope that you can understand me. So it's really a pleasure to be here. And what I thought I would do today is talk a little bit about the future of GIS, but also your future, and to share with you some ideas about the relevance of what we do in GIS and in remote sensing. Not simply you can join me on a small trip. We will look at some examples. I share with you some projects that I'm working on with my students. But I think the most important thing today is to help you to think with me about the future, what your opportunities are as a GIS or a remote sensing specialist, the importance of geographic information in general, and how we make a difference by using our skills and experience. So, esta es mi misión por una hora. So first of all, who am I? So you can see a little about me here. The most important thing, I think, is that I've had the privilege of teaching students GIS, geography, hydrology for many years. And from that experience, I'm always so impressed by what we can achieve when we work together. My interests range across many fields, but primarily I want to use GIS and Earth observation to do good things. And you can see, for example, some projects that I'm involved with here. I'll mention some of them today. I won't talk about a project which I'm doing aquí en México, in Michoacán, con los ríos de Morelia. Se investiga la calidad del agua in Michoacán. I will talk about two other projects. One, los riscos de los volcanos en Guatemala, y un otro en Belice. And I will also mention a project looking at green space. In this time, it will be an example from Malaysia. But I hope that you can transfer the examples and think about how we can use this similar methods here in Mexico. So, bienvenidos a Escocia. This is un grupo de mis estudiantes en el campo. This is just outside Edinburgh. It's a beautiful area. Tenemos los embalses por la agua potable. We have drinking water reservoirs. It is also an opportunity to think about how we affect and how we use the landscape and how we want to use it in a way that's sustainable, because that's for everybody's benefit. Geosciences, my school, mi escuela, es en mi país es tan grande. Tenemos 200 académicos, por ejemplo, solo en geografía y geología, meteorología. And we teach a large number of master's courses. So as we go today, I will mention the master's courses as part of thinking about your next steps for the future. We have about 15, tenemos 15 cursos de maestrías, todo por un año, and you might be interested to know a little bit more about those, and I can tell you more in the future. But primeramente, this talk is about you. It's about what you want to do, what you can do with applied geography, the opportunities for you, and how you can take these experiences. And I know that you're interested in data and methods and technology, but what I want to say to you today is that that's an important foundation, but actually on top of that foundation, there's some other skills which will be really helpful for your future. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those as well today. So this is not going to be a technical talk. It's going to be a talk about how you put together the tools you want, the herramientas, all those tools, including the technical ones, which I know you're learning, and also the other skills that you'll need to be successful. And I have 3 questions which I'd like you to think about, and for that reason, yo escribo en mi español terrible aquí, so you can have a little think about these questions while I'm talking for the next few minutes. I'll try to help answer these questions. Let's think about what are the trends that are happening across the world for geospatial information. Let's think about what our speciality is. You know, when you go for an interview, people will ask you, what is your unique selling point? And I think that actually what we do with geospatial is quite unique. Not everybody can do what we do. And we have to demonstrate the value of what we do with geospatial information. There are many programmers, there are many database guys, but there's not so many people who really understand about geospatial data. And I think this is your unique selling point. And as teachers, you know, I'm very happy to see some of my most respected colleagues here, Marco, Teresa, Anna. These people are teaching you very, very well and giving you really good skills. And I think it's also a chance for us as teachers to think about how we teach you as the next generation of students. And I think perhaps that's why Marco has invited me here to talk to you. Okay, so applied geography, ¿qué es? Posiblemente es una combinación de tecnología y, ¿cómo se dice?, aplicaciones. Los dos. No es simplemente los part técnica. It's necessary to translate our skills and find appropriate uses for them. We don't just want to be methods people who can do things, but we don't know por qual propósito. No? We have to know what's the purpose and which method is going to work for that. Now, I know that you know a lot about databases, about surveying, about drones, posiblemente, the different ways in which we capture geographic information, con satélites, etc. But what I want to say is that that is only the first part. Of course, we have to capture data well, we have to understand about the quality of that data, but after that, we have to filter the data and we have to then think about how to use it appropriately. So what I want to do today is to take us on a cycle, starting from the collection of data, but let's go through a whole cycle of what we do with the data, how we present it, how we make sure it has impact, that it has understanding, and people understand what we can do with it. It's a responsibility for us, I think, to do that. So first of all, how about the technological trends, las tendencias, in geospatial in El Mundo? This is the topics which were featured last year in GIS 2021. And you can see that it's emphasizing here the ways in which data is being collected. You know, from satellites, sure, but also from mobile devices, including your phones, and also from what we call microsensor networks, very small sensors which are being distributed, which are collecting information, for ejemplo, sobre las conditions ambientales. And it's interesting that although 3 of the 4 quadrantes are technical and about data, if we look at the 4th one, we see that one, it's about people. There are people here in this picture. And those people are collaborating around data. They're making sense of it, and I hope they're having the opportunity to contribute about that data. It's not simply being given to them. They are also having the chance to reflect on that data, to respond to that data, to react to that data. Sometimes, I think, historically, and I did this myself, I produce information in solo una dirección. Here's a great map. There you go. But in la realidad, we have to have a conversation over this information. We have to think about how we engage in a discussion over that information. So in the first part of this talk, what I'm saying is that applied geography is underpinned by technological infrastructures. Yes. So that's why we're learning about all these things. And I know that you know about, for example, when I talk about HIS or SIG, I'm talking about a big thing. And inside that, we have distributed data and information. We have the whole of the cloud, which is increasingly important for us now. Much of our software, much of our data, it's not sitting on our computers anymore, it's sitting in the cloud. And in order to access that data and do things with it, then we're having to interact with it in a different way. We're needing to collect the data, we need to understand about data formats and standards so we can read the data. But we also need to understand about web mapping, for example, so that we can show the data. So we use portales a lot more now. We use web interfaces a lot more. And we need to understand about geographic data standards more than we used to, so that we can receive data and we can process it and we can share it back to each other. So nobody finds standards exciting, but they're very necessary. So in this diagram, there's a lot of information, but what I want to show you is that I think you can use your technical knowledge, your know-how, to add value to the rest of the world, to economy, to society. So for business, but also for civil and for social justice. These are really things that you can do. This is what I would like you to aim to do. I want you to be somebody who understands geospatial technology, but can actually, you're not just a creator of data. I want you to be able to go all the way across my diagram, using things like knowing about standards, understanding about open data, and understanding about system connectivity, to start really producing information that's going to help us in this column here, where we're talking about what they call now business intelligence. The biggest growth area projected for GIS in the next 10 years is going to be the integration of HIS with business intelligence and business reporting systems. We also have this concept now of digital engineering, where we digitally design things for the future. And this is also coming a little bit from projects like big data for smart cities. But look, we also have here this concept of how we deliver our information. We're going to be producing lots of different kinds of methods. Okay, so we'll still have some maps, thank God, thank goodness, but we'll also have lots of other methods, right? We'll have apps delivering a lot of geospatial information already. Today I came with Uber and I was sitting in El Tráfico in El Centro Histórico looking at my little car not moving on my screen. That idea of almost real-time information now is something that's really happening. Accessing data through the web is now very common, both in terms of raw data from geoportals and also for processed data and information. And perhaps this would surprise you a little bit to see social media now identified as a key output, a key way of getting geographical information out to people. And I'll give you an example later, but a lot of alertas tempranos, early warning systems, people don't need a whole map. They just need a WhatsApp message saying, leave now. So sometimes we can have too much information, and we have to filter it and create just a small amount. Well, if we do all that, and I think you can do all these things, what we'll end up doing is influencing these sectors. We can influence government, we can influence institutions, and we can influence the general public, the citizens. And that's when GIS becomes really relevant, I think. Because I don't know about you, but I don't want my GIS only to be used by the government. I want my GIS in different formats to be used by all the different parts of society. And that's what I want to encourage you to think about. So where do we start? What application do you like? Pick one. Wow, there's so many, right? You know, GIS is used in almost everything these days. So that makes it difficult to, like, when we teach, which applications should we focus on? When my students do dissertations, they can choose anything, any of these bubbles. This year I have students doing work with natural resources, the general environment. I have students looking at the balance between forestry and agriculture, especially in many countries where we have to eat. but we have to protect biodiversity. So how do we resolve those challenges? So when my students say, what can I do with GIS? I say, well, you can almost approach any problem with GIS. It's a matter of how we do it. GIS is being applied around the world in so many different ways. And you will have your favorite methods, your favorite data, the kinds of things that you like to do. Some of you will be interested in demographics and population. Others may be interested in topography and terrain. Sometimes we can divide ourselves by the kinds of data that we work with. Other times we divide ourselves by the methods. Some of you may like to do analysis de redes. That might be something that you really like. Other people, analysis de las cuencas. So sometimes we divide ourselves by the methods. But what I want to suggest is that this just tells us you can do almost everything with GIS. What I find more helpful is to think about how we do it. And I think that we actually use geography. We apply the geographical ideas when we work. So for me, there's a sort of cycle. And for me, data collection and measurement is the beginning of this cycle. Once we have the data, though, that's only the first part. Sure, we have to make sure it's clean and that it's error-free. Yes, we have to store it in a database sometimes, and we have to remember which normal form or what table do we need to use. We need to do all this thing just to make sure that we're ready to then start analyzing our data. We do our analysis. Is that the place to stop? I don't think so. I think we then need to think about visualizing our data. Now, is that the place to stop? It used to be. I think a lot of the time we used to stop here. By the time we'd collected the data, stored it, analyzed it, and visualized it, pretty cansado, no? But actually, this part is really important. We have to make sure that that data goes somewhere. It influences somebody. It helps people make a better decision. So we have to think about this full cycle, I think. So whenever you're thinking about things like, say, data integration or particular spatial analysis, or how groups of you can collaborate together, all of those activities are happening somewhere in this cycle. One of the professional organisations worldwide, we are accredited by the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, our GIS programmes. What that means is that there's a certain quality of the programmes that we give. It has a certain international standard. And basically what this is saying to GIS professionals is, if you study with us at the University of Edinburgh and you graduate with a master's or a PhD in GIS, you are a trustworthy person to do GIS. It's both a positive recommendation and a responsibility. When this organization looked last year at geomatics and identified what are the new opportunities for professionals, because you're going to become a geomatics professional, these were the list of their latest tendencies. And I think you could guess some of them right. We've got drones, we've got distributed computing in here. We've got the growth of GSDI, which is basically the availability of really good quality, real-time GPS data almost everywhere. I know that you here in UNAM, you've been shifting some of your teaching from ArcGIS, for example, to QGIS, that you've been moving from proprietary systems to publicly available systems. That's another change. When I read the latest analysis of the GIS market in Latin America, the number one tendencia is this linking between GIS and business management. In other words, how do we explain to business what we do? How do we actually say, we've done this great network analysis, this is what it means for your business? And we know about smart cities. We know that in Mexico, there's been a lot of investment in smart cities. And we also know that smart cities involves a lot of technology, and sometimes the amount of technology that's needed, the amount of communication, the amount of bandwidth, means that some cities are not going to be able to take advantage of that as much as others, and some towns less. So I think we have to look at the opportunities of smart cities, but also be a little bit critical, because there's a lot of smaller cities and pueblos and pueblitos for whom that smart city concept is difficult to implement. 3 of the tendencies which I'd just like to I'll talk about a little bit more today. One is about contributed information and open data. Another one is about what we call visual analytics, different ways of mashing up and showing data and presenting it in different formats. And also I'd like to say a little bit about storytelling. Okay, so well, I'm telling you a story today, right? But actually I think that what we call cartographic narrative, some of you will know products like Esri story maps, but these ways of telling stories with spatial data I think are really important. So volunteer geographic information, this idea that citizens can become sensors, that we can collect and produce information and share it. Well, it's happening now. When you're navigating with Google Maps, it's telling you where other people are. It's telling you dónde es el congestión, cuáles son mejor ruta. So there's this feedback between individuals and information being presented back to us. What we're looking at in Google Maps is where people are in real time. But there's lots of other possibilities, and there's some interesting books being published about crowdsourcing of geographic information that you might be interested to read. And it talks about how we handle that sort of information, how we deal with the sort of uncertainties and quality of that information, but how we can use it sometimes to improve the way that, for example, governments communicate with the population, with us. So this idea that information that's being contributed in real time can be queried online, that we have real-time connections with information, is becoming more normal. And also the density of local information is becoming better. We have colleagues who work, for example, in archaeology, if I can say it, in archaeology in Edinburgh. And they're collecting and they're discovering a lot of new information from UAVs. They're finding new fields and new patterns which they didn't see before. And I could imagine that this could be very useful, for example, in identifying historical areas, like for example, Los Campos del Maya in the old Mayan cities. We saw an example with LiDAR data recently doing that. And I think UAVs are providing us with a lot more detail in certain places. When Marco asked me, what is the title of your talk, I was going to be a bit provocative and call it How to Change the World. Not because I thought we'd get a bigger audience necessarily, but because I thought sometimes we're too conservative in what we try to do with GIS. We're very well, I've done this analysis, I think it's quite good, here you are, would you like to have a look at it? I think we can be a little bit bolder. I think we can actually follow this cycle and actually start to make changes with GIS, change the way that people think about things by providing them with information in a way that they can use and understand. If we can do that, we can really take ideas from the real world. We can think about how we're describing it, we're collecting our data, how we're analyzing it and processing it, and then start thinking about how do we want to change it? Porque si no, all we're really doing is mapping what's there. And I worked on a project a few years ago where I was basically mapping the destruction of a rainforest. And it was very disappointing. And I thought, We have to do something about this, not just map deforestation. We have to think about how we can plan and how we can make strategies and how we can look at the reasons why this is happening and provide alternatives to that. And that's the moment, I think, when we become active, applied geographers. So here is where we have the information. We have such tremendous information available now, detailed, current information, and lots of it now. So let's think about how we analyze that and how we can come up with alternative suggestions, alternative proposals. Is this really the best place to put an airport? Is this really the best place to protect this water from contamination? And what could be the consequences of doing something? Or what can be the consequences of not doing anything? We can see those possible futures in plans. And this idea is known as the sort of cycle of geographic information. It's thought of as the way that we can use information positively and we can design solutions. And landscape architects have been doing this for a long time. They've been designing alternative futures, not just sitting back and mapping the present. So I think that's my challenge to you. If you really want to change the world, figure out a problem that really motivates you, and then think about how you can implement this cycle of collecting, analyzing, presenting your information in ways that can positively change things. I'll give you an example. Here's a cycle. This is a cycle of hazards and disasters. And I'm sure you remember this from maybe geography class. But this is the idea that when we have a disaster, could be an inundación, a terremoto, por ejemplo, we go through a process, a series of steps where we first of all try to make an initial response to this disaster. We try to find help, to help people in the situation. And then over time, we start thinking about how we can prepare and prevent or reduce the problem, the disaster happening again. So we go through a cycle of collecting information, analyzing it, and then thinking, okay, rather than just mapping the same thing again, is there something that we can do positively to make some changes, to maybe build resilience? That's a common phrase at the moment. Or to identify where people are vulnerable and do something positive to help. So I think we can, for example, find cycles like this that we can intervene in as applied geographers. I'll give you a quick example. A few of you will have read about or saw the news about the eruption of the Volcán de Fuego in Guatemala in Junio in 2018. It was a big eruption. There was very little preparation. There was very little warning of this. And for that reason, many communities which were living around the volcano had only a few minutes, less than an hour, to evacuate. And given the proximity and the speed at which some of these events occur, this was a case of what we call un fluvio pyroclástico. They happen very quickly. So it's important to prepare communities. In this case, these communities were not very well prepared, and the results for some communities were devastating. Here we can see a community called San Miguel de los Lotes, which was completely obliterated by the flow. Just over here, you can see a golf course on Campo de Golfo, and in this area, because people had better communications, a lot of cell phones, they were able to receive alertas tempranos, early warning, and most people here were able to evacuate. So it just shows you the importance of responding with information as quickly as possible. Some of you will know about the Copernicus early warning systems, which are maintained worldwide for mapping of natural disasters. This is actually an image from the following day on the 6th of June, 2018. And you can see this red spot here in the middle. If we blow it up down here, you're looking here into the crater of the volcano. This is the lava of the volcano. And this is the flow that came down the valley and devastated the villages. And you can see that as a cartographic product, this is very good. This has got full cartography, it's projected data, that it has a proper legend, probably even has a north arrow, which professors always look for. And it provides really important information for disaster planning immediately after the event. This is geomatics information, though. This is not information for the general public. We need to think about how we summarize and simplify information like that for the public. This is the front page of the New York Times the next day. And this image appeared in the paper. It went all around America, and online it went all around the world. And I think it's actually, it's quite low resolution, but it seems to me to capture what happened really well. This picture to me tells a story. It's a narrative. It tells me about the proximity of these villages, why people are living so close to the volcano. It makes you ask this question. Then it makes you see the process that happened and the damage and the short time. And it makes you think about what can we do to prevent this happening again. So I think if you use visualization well, even though this is simplified information, this is just a combination of publicly available open data. The pyroclastic flow was from the local geological institute, and it's using a standard digital terrain model draped with land cover. But I think it's an effective graphic, and it's available quickly for public consumption. We've even got a little inset map to show where we are in Guatemala. Of course, we can produce higher resolution images, and to understand about the damage that happened to the different parts. Here, this is a high resolution imagery of the golf course, locating it, and locating here the barranca where the flow happened, before and after. And similarly, the unfortunate village, San Miguel de los Lotes, before and unfortunately after. So this is when I think satellite imagery is really powerful. It captures the information. It provides crucial information, for example, for los Cruz Rojo and for organizations to plan emergency response. This tells us something in real time almost, very quickly after the event, about what to do next. But we also have to think round the cycle about how we prevent this happening again in the future. So we have short-term information for the next few days, which bridges are open, which roads are closed. That's really helpful. And when I told the story before, somebody asked me, Neil, surely there was a map already. Surely somebody had already estimated this risk. And the answer was yes, they had. This is a map produced by the USGS. This is actually a map demonstrating the possibility for lahares and fluvios pyroclasticos. And it was sitting in a drawer somewhere, and nobody used it at the time. And that, I suppose, made me think, why do we have such good information and sometimes we don't use it? In fact, this map was used more. This was a map produced within a week of the eruption, partly by colleagues in Edinburgh at the university with me, but also with the local geological institute and with colleagues from Michigan Tech who are Guatemalan technical applied geographers. And they produced this map in terms of the risk of future possible hazards. So by the 18th of June, we had a map of where the next hazards could occur, which villages were at risk in La Zona Rojo or Amarillo, or not at risk. And you can see that most of those pueblitos are all at risk. Of all the maps and visualizations that we made, This one was the one that was actually the most used because it was available in linear, it was available online. And this map was produced with our colleagues in Map Action. I don't know if you know Map Action. It's a humanitarian GIS and mapping agency that produces geospatial information shortly after disasters so that we can do it for what they call situation reporting. So this was done using Art Pro, technologies that you know, to create an online map so that people could see the situation, they could explain, they could see which roads were open or damaged, and they could direct aid and help directly to the places in greatest risk. And this was downloaded and used about 50,000 times in the 6 months following the event by all the agencies. So to me, this is like a really powerful way in which we go all the way around the cycle. We don't just map it and say, oh, qué pena. We say, let's map it and let's think about what we can do next. And this led us then to a project which you can check out online if you like. It's called volcanichazard.mapaction.opendata.arcgis.com. If you type that in, you'll see a project where we showed those results to volcano institutions around the world. And we said, do you have a volcano for which we could share the hazard information which you already have? It wasn't about making new data. It was simply about creating a portal so that people could find out what the hazards are right now for their volcanoes. And if you've got your Wi-Fi or you've got your laptop, have a little look at this project afterwards. So that's my story for today. And I guess my messages are that we can do globally good things. You know, understanding these things that I've talked about before. I haven't talked today very much about technology and data, but you can see how it underpins what we're doing. We also have to think about the consequences, the ethics of what we're doing as well. And you know, one organization that's important for doing that, think about which professional organization you might want to join in the future. This one has members all around the world, including in Latin America, and it will tell the world that you're an internationally reliable GIS person if you want to join that. There are other organizations available. Their best advice to you in terms of what you're going to do in the future is don't just consider when you finish this course that that's it. Basically, you need to keep up to date with many publications which are available from these professional organizations. They can be practice notes, they can be guidance notes, they can talk about the things. Here's one recently published about using global satellite navigation for land surveying around the world. Here's another one about how to resolve boundaries. So these are international guidelines about how we go about doing the practice of being effective with GIS. And you can see that they're covering a whole range of relevant topics for you. This one recently about land administration with crowdsourcing, for example. So these ideas I'm talking about are not just academic theories. That's a nice idea, Neil, but nobody's doing it. This is really happening. So, you know, I think that there's really a lot of interest beyond the conventional things that you're used to do. You know, how to do laser scanning practically, for example, is really popular at the moment. Issues about boundaries, issues about how we resolve conflicts. So my general message there is keep up to date. And you can, of course, find a publication that fits for you. Some of you might read GIS Professional, some of you might read from Engineering Surveys, maybe some of you read Geomatics World. And these are all available online as well. So just keep thinking about how to keep yourself up to date. Of course, one option is to come and do a master's with us, or to come and do a master's at a good institution in Mexico or somewhere else in the world. This is the only slide I'm going to use to talk about specifically the master's programs which we have in geosciences in Edinburgh, but I want to use it as an example of just the variety of master's courses that are available out there, which you might think about as a GIS professional. Okay, so the most obvious course is the course for which I've been the director of for many years. This is our Masters in Geographic Information Science. And this will deepen your knowledge about particular things. You'll learn about advanced spatial databases. You'll learn about distributed web mapping. You'll understand about hyperspectral remote sensing in multiple dimensions. We'll teach you about how to really use radar data. So this is a very technical master's, and it's a course that you might like to think about. We also over here have a course that's specialized in Earth observation and remote sensing. This is we'll talk about here the latest satellite sensors and how to process information from those and how to work with real-time satellite data, for example. But you can see also that we have lots of applications as well here. In fact, the most popular course for students from Mexico at the moment is this one about environment and development, about how we balance the needs of humans, ourselves, how we create sustainable development without damaging the environment. And you can see that there's lots of other related fields that you as geomatics people can assist with. There's a huge industry in geoenergy, for example, and in sustainable energy. Several of my students are working for companies locating wind farms so that they minimize conflicts with other land uses. I also have students who are looking at how to do sustainable agriculture to balance agriculture with the environment. And also we have students looking at, for example, water quality. I mentioned a project that we're doing here with people looking at groundwater quality. Again, really useful and a great application for spatial databases. So think about how you're going to keep up to date after you finish the course and what your next steps might be. And if you're interested in any of those master's courses, come and talk with me or follow up with Marco afterwards. One thing that we've all learned to do because of COVID is collaborate in different ways, not just like today. I want to stress it's really great that I'm back in person today. I'm super pleased to be here talking to you directly, but sometimes we can't, and we often have to collaborate in virtual ways these days. For me, what was fascinating was that last year during COVID, my students got the highest grades they've ever got before. And some of them told me, yes, that's because we're working all the time, Neil. But also, it was because they were collaborating more virtually with each other. They were sharing and collecting data. I had one student who was based in the UK who was collecting data for Central America, who was working with a geoprocessing company in North America. You know, it's incredible what we can achieve as GIS people. And when we gave, at the graduation, when we gave the awards out, they said that, you know, these skills which we're learning about how to collaborate virtually are really skills which will help us in the future. You can be working next year with people in America, people in Europe. You can be collaborating with people in Edinburgh. It's all possible. One thing I would suggest to you as a tip is, as a GIS person, this can be you. You can become the central person in many projects. People need information and data, and you can become the go-to person for that kind of information. So consider how to do that. My last little story is about green space. In Mexico City and in lots of cities, we need to keep as much green space as we can. We need sombre, we need shade, we need to keep cool in the hot of the day. We need to try to keep our biodiversity in the city. This again is a great example. Many of the things I'm showing you today have been rural examples, but actually GIS is super powerful in the city setting, in the urban environment. You know, this is one urban jungle. And some people might say, CDMX es un otro, no? So when we have very high density urban areas, the green spaces between them become really, really important for animals, for air quality, for public health, salud publicum. But actually, we often lose green spaces before we know, and we don't monitor that very well. This was a project that we did for Kuala Lumpur, looking at just how much green space they really have. And when we produced the mapping, they were really surprised at just how much green space is hidden inside the city. And again, driving through Mexico City today, it made me realize how much green spaces we have, not simply along the main avenidas that we know very well, Avenida Juarez, Reforma, all these places, of course, Chapultepec, we have green spaces, but we have lots of little hidden green spaces as well. And this was a project in which we created a comprehensive inventory of all the different kinds of green spaces. And this information is now being used by the city planners to actually, preserve and protect green space. But if we didn't know that, we couldn't tell them, what they have and try to keep it. I always try to keep my talks down to earth, simple, with some simple messages. So this is actually a publication about how we might use Earth observation for sustainable development. But I think the messages are actually really good. I just wanted to share them with you as I'm starting to finish now. The first thing is that whatever we're trying to do, we need to try to think about how to collect good quality data about the environment. That might be high resolution, it might just be appropriate frequency, but it might be about the particular environmental factor that we really want. So think, is this the best data source that we have available? Secondly, Earth observation is really strongly indicated for managing natural resources in many parts of the world now. So it's integral to our GIS program now. We almost can't teach GIS without teaching something about Earth observation as well. Thirdly, we produced a lot of information in the past, which was a lovely map, but nobody used it because it wasn't aligned to management purposes. So my message these days to everybody, including myself, is what do people really want to know? What's the information that they really want? Try to make those maps, or try to make that information in a format that they really want. And finally, try to evaluate if your maps or if your data works by looking at the local capacity. When you give somebody some information, think to yourself, can they process this? Here's a great satellite image, but if they can't handle that, then is it very useful? So try and think about what capacity people have to work with the data. Okay, so I'm finishing. I want to see you all graduating as GIS professionals. This is a beautiful graduation hall in Edinburgh, where a few people in this room probably remember graduating a few years ago. This is a list of attributes, graduate attributes, that I think will be really helpful to you in your future careers. These are the things. This list isn't produced by me. This is produced on behalf of this organization by employers, people who really hired you. And it says, why did you hire a geomatics graduate instead of somebody else? So if you can, the more of these things you can do, the more chance you have of being employed in GIS and related areas. I'll just pick out a few. I've tried to mention these in the talk today, but let's summarize them. First of all, give people what they need and in a format that they can use and in a way they can understand it. In fact, if there's only one message today, that's really my message to you. That's what we all need to do as GIS people. I think that we do a lot more than just give people data. I think we provide them services and information, and we build up partnerships with the people that we work with. So don't sell yourself short. You are able to do a lot more than just provide data. I also talked about collaboration, the need to work as part of a wider team. That's the reality. So if you come to do a master's with me, you'll do group work. I'm sure that Marco, Anna, and your colleagues here will get you to work in groups sometimes as well. I know that it's not very comfortable. Sometimes we don't like working in groups, but I have to tell you, it's part of the reality that we need to work in groups. Of course, stay up to date, and sometimes it can be your communication skills that makes the difference in terms of we could all have the same data, but one person's better at communicating it. They make nicer maps. They know when to use animation. They know when to use color effectively. So sometimes just those ways of presenting the information make a very big difference. It's not just about making it pretty. It's about how people really use it. And so what I want you to become is not a data provider, but an essential link with people who really want to use it. And to finish off, I just want to say something about where you might go next in terms of careers. And I know that you're not finished yet, but what I wanted to say to you is that this is the traditional sort of things that my graduates used to do. They used to go into surveying and mapping consultancies, or they used to go and work for the software companies themselves. Or they would work in a utility like Conagua, for example, or the Salud or Emergencias, or los Bomberos. Or they would work in Energía, or they would work in environment. That's already a very nice range of things. But what I'm trying to show you today is that these are just the beginning, that there's many more possibilities than this for you. This is just a little bit of an information now about what we call the size of the geographic information systems market worldwide. And this basically tells you that GIS is not a small thing that just a few people do. This is saying that GIS is actually globally important economically, that GIS actually underpins a lot of economies. And you can see that there's a lot of growth in mobile GIS at the moment. There's also a lot of growth in remote sensing. But if you like making maps, there's still about 40% of the market share if you can make a good map. So don't forget to make good maps in cartography. The other thing I wanted to show you is where that growth is. There's a lot of growth in North America, for example. And there's a lot of emerging markets in Central and South America. So in terms of these predictions, we can see North America and Asia Pacific as the two big markets. But in terms of this book, which is something that probably you should read at bedtime, this is the Latin American Geographic Information Systems Market Report 2020, it's the latest edition. And even despite COVID, they're predicting a 10% growth year on year in GIS services. And let's look at the list. Hey, who's number one? The top three countries these are the top three countries for GIS growth. That means there's going to be a lot of jobs for you guys. Yeah? And some of these things that we talked about in terms of these initiatives are driving it that I've been talking about today. So what I want to say to you is the future looks really good. Some days when you're waiting for a big data set to load or the system just crashed, I know it's frustrating, but hold on to that motivation and think what you can do with GIS in the future, and you really can change the world. Gracias.
¿Tienen alguna pregunta para el Dr. Neil?
Well, thank you, Neil. I want to ask two questions. First one is about the state of art of GIS and geography, and how much can improve through technical things and more satellites and stuff. how much can improve, or we are in a situation where GIS is almost perfect and we need to work more in interpret the information. The second question is about how to say it. As independent groups, without the help from a government or institution or a corporation, how and where do you think we can apply GIS and make a change in the world in an individual or independent effort?
Those are great questions. Thank you very much indeed for both of them. First of all, in terms of areas for improvement, you asked the question, do you think GIS and software, say, for processing this information is perfect? We all know the answer to that question. I think that there is one of the skills that you all have is making it work. Yeah, dealing with the frustrations of when the software fails us, when the backup doesn't work, and all those technical hassles. You know, that's why people will pay you to make it work. So it's almost because it's not yet at the level of software that everybody can use. There's some evidence, there are some small apps which are very user-friendly, which use geospatial data, this locational services apps. Now, I think I mentioned Google Maps, just as an example of something that uses geospatial data in a quite user-friendly way. But the big difference is that we often want to develop it, we want to design it, we actually want to do it for a particular purpose. And that means that we have to be able to open up the app, redesign it, think about the data sets, and make it work in a different way. So one or two of my students now work for a particular large GIS company. Okay, you can guess who. In the development teams. And they know about many of the bugs, and there's this kind of constant evolution of GIS software. The most popular ones have been rewritten 3 or 4 times now over the last 20 years to keep up with the different technologies. And the architecture of those systems keeps changing. It doesn't necessarily mean that the experience for us gets a lot better. You know, sometimes there's new releases of the software which are actually harder to use than the previous ones. So that goes back to my idea that you have to learn how to make the software, how to fight with the software almost, to make it do what you want to do. So maybe don't wish for perfect software, because then everyone will be able to use it. But secondly, it's really difficult to put enough resources on maintaining and developing software. These products are big and they're large, and it's really hard for their development teams to kind of figure out which bit needs to be fixed next. And it's driven by lots of external factors. So for those reasons, I think the answer to your question is we know that the software's not reached that perfection. It's probably never going to get there. And for that reason, there's an opportunity for everybody in the room. And the second question, I really like that question about, I got the sense of what you're asking me there is, what can 1 or 2 individual people do in the big scheme of things with GIS? You know, to be really effective, do we need to be in a big institution? Can I only ever be effective if I'm working in the gobernadore's office in CDMX with a huge screen like this? I don't think so. I think actually, if we think about the examples of crowdsourcing, if we think about participatory GIS, if we think about initiatives like OpenStreetMap, those are initiatives where every single one of us can do something useful. So if you ever go to a hackathon, or you ever go down and take part in a project, we had one in Edinburgh a few weeks ago, where people were collecting data for an African country with UNICEF, for a UN organization, looking at trying to look at facilities for children in Botswana. Just an example. But I'm sure there's hundreds of examples like that, even in Mexico, where we want to get better quality local information, where in IGg, God bless them, it's going to be a while before they revise that map because it's in a very quiet rural area. But those places sometimes are where we need to understand what's changing. So, from the local people, if we can give people a chance to tell us, or we can work together, putting together open data sets, I think we're incredibly powerful as individuals if we can organize ourselves. So thank you for those questions.
First, thanks by your presentation, and my question is, it's a bit harder to answer because it's about the corruption, no? And you said during the conference that there are some projects that they are made by the information they are made, but they don't release or execute them. And for example, you said about the volcano of Guatemala, and you said that there was information and make the maps and make everything about the information of that risk, but they don't execute and don't make the actions to avoid all problems that it get the population when the volcano explodes. And my question is about that: how we can, like applied geographers, how we can avoid the corruption and act at time, because it's I think it's the worst thing about our career for at least on Latin America. I think it's the thing more harder to solve like on our career.
Thank you very much for that question. I think it's a brilliant question. And some people would say, we have a phrase in English, it's called el llama the elephant in the room. And it means, it means that there's this big thing here which nobody's talking about. And you're right that issues about data and power, really important. We don't usually teach this to our students. But we know that if you do have information, if you do have up-to-date information that's very powerful, you can use that for very good things. And there's also issues about data being made and not being shared. So sometimes it's not deliberate. Sometimes it's almost accidental, that the data's there, but it's not in a format that's very useful, or people don't realize the potential of the data. So sometimes we can discover data and we can make use of it. And you're right, sometimes the data's there and people want to keep it. And in my country, if I think back 20 years ago, this is what it was like. Marco, I'm not going to share my data because this data for himself as well. And it took us a long time. In fact, we thought the problem, first of all, was about standards, and we used to talk about interoperability of data sets. But it wasn't really. It was about institutions that were wanting to protect their data because they felt that that data and that information was their basis, their reason to be there. And it took a long time to realize that Marco can keep his data set. I don't want to steal his data because he knows that data really well. He maintains that data for everybody. And I know my data set, and let me keep that, and I will maintain it. But when we need to make it available, when we need to figure out how to share the data, you need that. You need some of this data and some of my data. So we need to figure out how that data sharing can work. And that took us about 20 years to work that out. I don't know where we are in Mexico with that right now.
Okay, I got those two questions. Is in the same way of my classmate. And the first one is, well, at the first point, this Mexican or Latin culture of always chasing the money. We're always trying to get more and more. And I think because of that, maybe all of these ways we can improve the life of people, the government try to don't make it. My question is, well, my first question is, do you think there were in a few years ago and in the past people who has our knowledge to improve the life of people and to create all of these ways to to improve life of people, or is our way, or is our turn to try it? And if there is our turn to try it, I don't want to get murdered, So if I want to ask you if you think there's any kind of work we can do to try to protect the people, try to protect the green areas, try to make all of this stuff our career is trying to involve without getting in problems, or there isn't any other way? Because if there isn't any other way, I will make it, but I will try to make it creating the less violence I can.
A great question. I really like the honesty in this meeting, the way that we're talking about things which are confronting us day to day and will affect our careers. What I can say is that really what you're touching on there broadly is the idea of transparency, I think, which is to do with what happens, what are the consequences when we make data available. And I have many stories from my own country and from other countries where I've worked in, where sometimes that causes a conflict. Because in a situation where the people don't really know how the decision's being made, once we start revealing more about that planning decision, why did we decide to build the airport over here? What data was put into that? It's a challenge for government, actually, because they want sometimes to be the ones who control that information. Whereas against that, we now have a trend, there's remote sensing, there's open data, there's lots of other ways in which information can be found and made available. So by being more transparent as GIS professionals, sometimes you're right. When you joke about, I don't want to get killed, actually it's not so funny, because in some countries you can be revealing something which people don't want you to know. I once had a very difficult conversation when I discovered I got a new shapefile one day for some protected areas in a country which I won't mention, which it is. And the shapefile, they said, okay, Neil, we have an update to the shapefile. I said, okay, thank you, gracias. Why do we have an update to the shapefile? Oh, in reality, when I drew it on the screen and looked at it, there were some big gaps, and some of the protected areas had changed. One of them had disappeared. I'm like, okay, on it. And the reality, of course, was that the minister had given away these bits of land from these protected areas, and he was very, very unhappy about that data becoming public, because so we have to confront. I don't have solutions for you directly, but what I can say is that as GIS people, that data and that ability to share information can sometimes make us vulnerable, because we're in a situation where actually we know things that the politicos wish we didn't. So there is a responsibility there to do that. Individually, we all have to think to ourselves about how we deal with that. And it's taken us, I think, 30 years to get to a point now where the transparency level is enough that eventually you get to a point that the level of corruption and the amount of transparency means that they can't do that anymore. But it takes a long time. Great question.
So only for closing all of this. So we have to be this kind of Troja horse trying to get into the government and improve all of these plans. And that's what you're trying to say, no?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Because I think that actually, I mean, so in this example, some of my students went to work on the land information system. And they basically said that it shouldn't be in the gift of a certain minister to just give land away for political reasons. You know, there really should be a proper planning process to do that. So the geographic information was actually revealing a governance issue. Now, we can't solve everything, but we can work. You know, we do work with agencies who are trying to sort of to justify why things are being planned in this way. And then at the very least, what we can see is, okay, so that plan hasn't happened. Why not? There's been development over here, but not over there. And then we can, you know, that's reality. We can see that. The satellites can see that already. So, you know, I think we just have to be, you know, obviously we have to be careful about our own jobs and in situations like that. But on a more positive note, that transparency that we can create eventually has a positive result. Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. You talked a bit about businesses and project management, and how GIS is becoming more important every day. For example, here in Latin America, do you really believe that's something that's going to have an exponential growth despite many countries being underdeveloped? And what I mean by that is there's not as much technology available, and also it's a lot less, it's just less developed in general.
It's a good question. If you look at the details of the market report, and that's the summary of that's available online, generally people have kind of had the view that the Latin American market is it's a very small percentage of total share, but also, as you say, kind of where it's being driven by at the moment is primarily by the bigger organizations. What we haven't seen as much of in the past has been small-scale use of GIS. And what we see, though, if we look at examples from, say, what's happened in Europe, what's happened in America, what's happened in Australia to feed that growth, it's mostly actually been a combination of two things. One is more freely available open data. So like in many countries now, data that's collected for the public good should be made available at no cost, right? Just for the cost of maintaining it. So that's a broad principle that's being adopted. And that would have to be legislated for, but I think that would be a super positive stimulus to the market. People say, oh no, you know, my organization needs to charge for data. We're not saying that you have to give data for free. You can still charge them to maintain data. But the basic idea of if you provide the basic data, we provided most of our national mapping agencies' basic data sets are now available free. And there was a big discussion in government about why are we giving away all that data? But the result has been, and the same in North America, north of the Mexican border, that there's been a whole load of startup businesses that have used that data and built apps and created an economy based on that freely available data. So the biggest holdup, the biggest constraint was data, number one, and number two was people. that there weren't enough people trained like you guys to actually see those opportunities of joining up those data sets in different ways and taking advantage of that. So those are the two main things that stimulate the market. And I guess, you know, if we're saying growth is slower in Latin America, we're probably going to point to data availability and simply that we need more trained guys like you to make it happen. Thank you.
Hello. Currently, what is the most important topics that are beginning development in geography applied? And what is the country that is developing this science the most?
Oh, great question. So, I mean, the first one, which is in terms of sort of which areas are developing the most rapidly, there's a lot of growth in relating to transport and infrastructure in many countries. So as transport infrastructures develop, there's the whole industry about how you survey that road, right through to how do you then add that to the network and build that, say, into location-based services and navigation. So in a lot of countries, it's transportation that's the main one. An area which has been very solid over the years has been natural resources, energy resources. So again, utilities. So as areas grow, they need water, they need electricity. So and all those utilities need mapping, and there's a revenue stream attached to all of that. So that's another area in terms of utilities that's growing everywhere. The third one at the moment that's listed is space and satellites. So there's a lot of new satellites being developed, including in Mexico. I was at a meeting a few weeks ago listening to the deployment of CubeSat satellites. IPN is talking about launching a satellite. There's lots of interest in generating a sort of little Mexican space agency. But as well as that, there's just the volume of data that's already available from the constellations. You know, there's a huge demand in what they call downstream data processing. So if you know how to use Snap to process, you know, Sentinel-1 data, you can get a job tomorrow. Now, there's huge amounts of volume of satellite data that needs processing for all kinds of applications, particularly things like to do with food and crop yields and agricultural futures. There's huge demand in that area as well. I haven't talked about defense, but if we just look around the world at the moment, there's obviously also a big geographic intelligence industry. And I'm keeping off that a little bit because it depends how comfortable you are with that. But the reality is that it's also a major employer around the world. But thank you for those questions. And I think the question about where research is happening, well, the great thing about that is it's happening all over. There's research going on in research institutes throughout Mexico. There's some really great research happening in different areas using GIS. There's small units popping up everywhere where data becomes available, looking at things like public health in smaller cities of Mexico. It's definitely not just happening in CDMX. Terry.
¿Quieres en español o en inglés?
Vamos.
¿Qué prefieren todos? ¿Español? Están muy calladitos. Bueno, yo trabajo aquí, pero me quería aprovechar la pregunta que hizo el compañero, no sé tu nombre, pero me pareció muy interesante, sobre todo soy investigadora aquí en el instituto, en el contexto de México, y por lo que dijiste me impactó mucho, de que no quiero morir, ¿no? Por el trabajo que hago. Y yo entiendo eso que tú dices, siendo mexicana. ¿Tú la entiendes, Neil? Do you understand everything, right? Okay. Pero yo quería dar una nota un poco positiva y de esperanza, sobre todo para ustedes que inician, ¿no? En eso, porque yo entiendo que a veces tocamos temas que pueden ser de riesgo, ¿no? En un país que habitamos con tanta problemática. Y voy a dar un ejemplo de un compañero de aquí del instituto que trabajó en una comunidad de Michoacán, Cherán, que es una comunidad que se hizo autónoma, independiente, porque por la amenaza del narco. Ellos trabajan en el bosque y el narco tomó el bosque para sembrar aguacate, lo que hizo, breve se los cuento, ¿no? Lo que hizo la comunidad indígena purépecha es volverse autónoma y cerrar puertas para todos, hasta para partidos políticos, demás. Y el trabajo que hizo el compañero, que tiene que ver con GIS y con sensores remotos, fue demostrar que a partir de que la comunidad de Cherán se hizo autónoma y expulsó al narco y partidos políticos malosos, corrupción, etcétera, es que se empezó a recuperar el bosque. Y él lo demuestra en su estudio con imágenes satelitales y con GIS. Entonces yo creo que se puede hacer mucho también por el compañero que mencionó algo de qué se podía hacer fuera de las instituciones, gobierno, etcétera. Y hay muchas NGOs, o sea, organizaciones no gubernamentales que trabajan no solo el tema de bosques, y digamos que esto hasta nos da una ventaja porque no tenemos que estar en el sitio y todo lo podemos hacer también con sensores remotos, ¿no? Entonces nos da cierta ventaja de seguridad porque ya no se tiene que arriesgar uno a ir al sitio con los sensores remotos. Entonces yo creo, en general, las aplicaciones que tiene GIS son infinitas. Mismo yo que no trabajo directamente, que sea especialista en GIS, utilizamos GIS, ¿no? Yo trabajo con cuestiones de sismos y tsunamis y el riesgo, y las aplicaciones son infinitas. Ahora mismo me acaban de aprobar un artículo para el tsunami que provocó Tonga, ¿no? A nivel mundial. Sin estar en Tonga, hicimos rápidamente la evaluación para México y demás, ¿no? Entonces yo sí les quiero, soy graduada de la Universidad de Edimburgo, con mucho orgullo, les quiero decir que también, bueno, es una universidad buenísima, una ciudad segura, a diferencia de esta, pero nos sirve, o sea, para tener todos esos conocimientos que nos proporcionan los ejemplos que dio Neil también de colaboración a nivel mundial con universidades de otros países son buenísimos. Y yo les quiero decir que no hay límite en eso, que si hay límite a lo mejor puede ser el cielo, pero no más allá. O sea, ustedes pueden hacer lo que quieran si realmente lo quieren hacer. Entonces piensen en eso, están iniciando. Y a mí, aunque es Neil, es su plática, pero yo quería decirles que me dio mucho gusto verlos aquí. O sea, después de 2 años de encierro, creo que todos estamos contentos de vernos y de poder interactuar. Y pues bueno, ahí está una opción para sus futuros estudios y trabajo, y no solo estudios, ¿no? Y las puertas para más trabajo.
Okay, there is 2 questions online. Tanya asked, what is the procedure for selecting a tutor in Edinburgh?
Okay, so if this is for a master's application, possibly, see. So, I am a program director. At the moment, I've directed the GIS program for a number of years. Within that, we have, I think there are about 5 or 6 of us who act as tutors. So, for example, typical class size each year, we have about 35 students, and we divide those students between us so to act as their tutors, as pastoral, as advisors. What we like to do, Marco, as you know and as Terry knows, is that our philosophy is that when you come to Edinburgh, I think it's actually something which we share as GIS people, is that we try to have a group, we try to work together. GIS there's always challenges. So nobody really should be saying, I'm the expert, because we are all working together. So you would come, you would have one of us would be allocated as your tutor. But some of my students can't remember who is the tutor because they ask me, okay, I have a pregunta para Neil, but if Neil no es disponible, an otra persona puede responder. We work together as a team. And one of the nicest things that our students said to us is that it's como un familia. It's like a family of GIS people. And that includes our alumni as well. That we always welcome back our students. In fact, some of our former students now teach with us. So that for us as professors is a really great thing, that we see that the family expands. So I think if you shouldn't, as Dr. Teresa was just saying there, Edinburgh is a very safe city, but also we know that things can sometimes go wrong. And if you need help, then any of us are available to help you. And I think people's experiences who've studied with us, if you talk to any of our alumni, I think they will tell you that we will take you from the first day to the final day and beyond, and we will help you. So there's a good tutoring system available, and we can help with all kinds of things. You know, not all the questions I get are technical questions. Sometimes it's very, very simple questions like, how cold is it? You know, what's the food like? How safe is it? You know, and so we're happy to answer any of those questions. Thank you for the question.
Nathan Romero asks, can a geologist student apply for the world of GIS?
Absolutely. My colleague Bruce Gittings, who teaches the course in Bases de Datos that Marco was talking about, he was originally a geologist. Many of my colleagues came from backgrounds in geology and geophysics and understand very well the issues of geospatial data. In some ways, I can say that I'm quite superficial as a geographer because I'm interested in the surface. But actually, geologists understand very well the three-dimensionality of geographic data, about volume, about mapping what you can't see because it's subterranean. And in geosciences, we have many people working in geology, in geophysics, in agua tierra, groundwater, who work with GIS. So the whole industry of working with spatial data is not just about surface mapping anymore. And definitely if you're a geologist, I think if you've done geological mapping, for example, you already know the basics of map projections and how to present information as maps, how to interpret maps. So for sure, many of my students each year are geologists. So for sure, that's good.
Si no hay ninguna otra pregunta, ¿no? Bueno, entonces le damos las gracias al doctor Oni nuevamente por su presentación. Le damos las gracias también a nuestra audiencia en línea por conectarse y bueno, le entregamos al doctor el reconocimiento por su participación y les damos las gracias a ustedes por asistir. Muchas gracias.
Con placer.